As I've stated many times in print and in video overviews like these, I'm a huge fan of designer Rainer Knizia. So when publisher 25th Century Games offered to send me a review copy of its new version of Tutankhamun, a game that originally appeared in 1993, 28 years ago at the time I'm recording this video, kind of astounding, I took them up on the offer because I had played the original game only once in 2005. Long time ago. I had no reference for what Tutankhamun is, so I wanted to check it out, see what the new version had to offer, and as is often the case with Knizia games, the more I played, the more I found myself having something to say. First, let's talk about how the game works. Here are the components of Tutankhamun set up for a 3-player game. The only difference based on player count is going to be the number of ships at the start of the path and the number of spirit points that you begin the game with. With 2 players, you have 30 points, and 3 players, you have 28, and so on down to 6 players, you have 18. Your goal is to be the first player to get down to 0 spirit points, and you will do that by offering artifacts to Tutankhamun, whose sarcophagus awaits you in the Tomb of the Box. The path is comprised of 80 tiles, 70 artifact tiles and 10 god tiles laid out at random at the start of play. You put everything face down and then flip them over and just start assembling them in random order. The 70 artifact tiles are broken up into sets. You have 3 sets of 2, 3 sets of 4, 3 of 6, 3 of 8, as well as 10 scarab rings. These artifacts will score when all of a particular type has been collected, and you are going to collect them by sailing your boat down the Nile and picking them up. Turns in Tutankhamun are about as simple as you can get. On a turn, you move your ship as far down the Nile as you want, taking whatever tile you land on and putting your boat in its place. If I want the throne, for example, my boat stops here. I take this throne. I could move up here and take this throne. There's all sorts of reasons for why you want to move one place over another. The 8 on the tile is a reminder of how many there are in the path, as well as the maximum number of points that someone can score from collecting these. Perhaps the red player wants to go and take the Oscars, as we tend to call them here. Yellow wants to compete for them. Now, if all players have passed 1 or more tiles, then those tiles are placed in the underworld. So the Senate board goes here, out of play. It is still part of the set, but no one owns it. No one is competing for ownership of the most or second most Senate boards. Keep taking turns in this order. Maybe I want this one that has only 2 tiles. Red player goes and gets a sarcophagus. Maybe yellow really wants to double down on Oscars, and so on. Nothing scores as you play, as you're just taking the tiles, except for the Senate rings. So if I take a Senate ring, then my spirit points immediately goes down 1, and I collect the rings. Now, when all the tiles of a set have been collected, let's say the red player recklessly moves ahead and collects this, of which there are only 2, and of which I already have 1. Well, when all the tiles of a set have been collected, that set then scores. Collected or removed from play, that set scores. There are only 2 of these tiles. There is a tie for who has the most. And in this game, ties are broken by whoever is farther back on the Nile. That is, the player who is less eager to rush ahead and make a name for themselves, perhaps, by collecting something. Someone who is more patient. So the tie is broken in favor of me, who's actually the white player in this game. So I would score 2 points and advance 2 spaces. The red player gets second place and gets half this value, 1 point. So I'm not sure why red would do that, but perhaps they had a particular reason for making that move. And yellow takes a move. You're going to go along here, and so on. You can keep moving down the path. Now, an alternative that you might have, instead of moving forward any number of spaces, you can move backward exactly 1 space to collect the tile behind you. So red can go backwards now and collect this tile. And on the next turn, red could go back and collect this throne. And can keep going back, and if there was someone here, you would skip over that person collect this, collect this, collect this, and so on, moving back on the path. So not everything is necessarily lost as you move down the path, but in general, things just go away. They are moved to the underworld, cannot be collected, and if you are the last player in the path, well, there's no tiles behind you, and you must move forward on your turn. Tutankhamun has 5 different gods with 2 tiles of each type on the path, and when you take a god tile, you resolve it immediately. One tile lets you move something from the path to the underworld, perhaps resolving a set immediately or keeping it out of the hands of an opponent. Another tile lets you swap 2 tiles that are in front of you. Another lets you grab a tile that you have already passed, assuming there are any tiles there, or move your ship to the back of the line, so you can essentially start again. Another lets you bring a tile back from the underworld and add it to your collection. And the final one, you can swap a scarab ring that you've collected, a ring that you've already scored 1 point for any tile on the path. So the ring goes back into place, it can be scored again, while you get the tile that's there. As tiles start to collect in the underworld, you come to value the tiles on the path somewhat differently. Because 2 bracelets have been removed, on my turn perhaps I want to take the bracelet in front of me, because this one tile is now at least guaranteed second place, which will be worth 2 spirit points removed from my total, which is better than a knife, which is only 1 point minimum for second place. So things start changing a bit based on what people are passing over, and it's all under control collectively of the players, because nothing has to be passed over. These things could have been collected previously, but you've moved on. You each have goals that you're trying to do with whatever you're collecting, and the intersection of all those desires and what happens as a result of it is carried out over the course of the game. Now, I look at the bracelet, the last one is here. It's not necessarily going to be resolved for a while, and often you are looking ahead on the path to see what's near the end, what is least likely to be collected. The Senate board is the last tile on the path right before you get to the tomb. Probably that would be the last thing passed, and maybe that's why people have been passing over it, is they don't want to compete for something that might not be resolved before the game ends, because the game ends immediately when someone gets down to 0 points. You do have the freedom to jump ahead, and you could take that last Senate board because the previous one is here and then there's none here. So in theory, you could jump ahead and get quite a few and rush those 8 points. But what else do you have? If you have not gone out by scoring those 8 points, now you're restricted to going back 1 space, back 1 space, back 1 space, and so on, unless you get the god tile that lets you jump all the way to the end of the path again. So you're looking ahead and seeing what's there, but so is everyone else. You are looking collectively around the table what each person is trying to score, and now you have competing desires for what's going to happen. I mentioned that the tie is broken by the player in the back, but of course, maybe you don't even have a tie because you collect more of something than someone else. Maybe as the yellow player goes along, they've got 2 Oscars. We've got an Oscar here. Maybe the yellow player passes and goes for a throne, which then is going to put this Oscar out of play, put a throne here, which is going to put them 1 up on what I have, and all this other stuff is going to go away. Often you can move ahead and let things fall into the underworld, and this is not a competing player. It's just sort of washed aside. And so now, with 2 Oscars, they've got a good shot at getting a third. Where is the other one? Move along. Oh, quite a ways down the path. But they're in a good position ahead of the red player at this point. And again, they could jump ahead and just grab one and lock it in should they wish to do so. The freedom of movement is interesting and somewhat mind-boggling because everything is open to you. Everything. And it feels weird. You don't know what to do, but what you're doing is all going to be dependent on what everyone else is doing as well. So, again, when all of a tile is collected, whoever has the most of that tile would score that number of points. If there's a tie, the tie is broken in favor of the player who is farther back on the path. If there's a tie for second place, again, tie is broken further back on the path. The rings work a little differently because they're 1 point each when you collect them, and when all 10 rings have been removed from the path, whoever has the most rings scores 5 points, or rather loses 5 points, and there is nothing for second place. You keep going on the path until someone gets 0 and wins the game. If multiple players reach 0 on the same turn, which could happen if everyone jumps ahead suddenly and we remove lots of tiles at once, you start resolving the tiles one by one as you put them in the path. Well, this one isn't done because there's more of these, and maybe now this is the last throne, and now we score the thrones before we would score these and before we would score something else. Multiple people can still hit 0 on the same turn because you're going to resolve all of these tiles to finish this player's turn. And again, if there's a tie for reaching 0 on the same turn, whoever is farther back on the Nile wins. The gist of Tutankhamun is simple. Move ahead as far as you want or go back one space. Take a tile. If it's a god, use it. If it's an artifact, collect it. If all of that artifact is gone, score it. Simple. If you've passed things, well, you score them as you remove them based on whatever is left in the game. Everything is simple except, of course, what you're trying to do, which is go out before everyone else, which means you need more of the right artifacts than each other player. But everyone is deciding what is right during the game based on how people are picking things up and what is being thrown away. It's not obvious. You're going to look around the table and you see this person already has this. Is anyone competing for second there? Can I pick up a single tile, possibly be second, and get rid of 2 or 3 points in a 4 or 6 just by picking up that one based on what else has been thrown away? That option is open to almost everyone at the table, depending on where your ship is on the Nile. But is it worth it or not? And you don't know. It's hard to judge everything just because everything is so fluid with how people can move by going anywhere on the path. It's interestingly open to those types of choices, where you start valuing tiles differently, and sometimes if 2 people are competing or starting to collect something, you're like, okay, I'm just going to jump out of that completely. But then you'll notice that, wait a minute, it's only a 4 tile, that person has 2, this one has 1, and the last tile, well, the other person had already passed it, and maybe they're going to get a god tile later and go backwards or do some tricky type of thing, or I can just pick it up, have second place while I'm behind them, and I get the 2 points for second place with 1 tile. So what's the value of every tile that you pick up? Can you get more points per tile based on whatever choices are available? And again, it's hard because strict value doesn't hold because it all depends on what everyone else is doing. It's a fascinatingly open game to player style. There is a bit of a change with a 2-player game. In that version of the game, the underworld essentially becomes a 3rd player. And when you are scoring for a completed set, you have to consider what the underworld has in it. And so you have a certain value to the underworld at that point where you are trying to push things in there that is going to top what the other player has and push them down into second place. The players always win in ties against the underworld because the underworld does not have a ship. It is not on the Nile. You are always going to win a tie in favor of the underworld, but against the other player, it depends on the location of your ships on the Nile. The rulebook leaves out this detail, unfortunately, which is found online on BGG. The publisher answered that. It would have been good to have that clarification in the rules. It's a very different game because, again, it's just you and one other player. Everything is under control of the 2 of you, and you just try to outwit the person along the way. But because in the 2-player game and in all the games, everyone is keeping an eye on everyone else at the same time, you often tend to have this pace where everyone's roughly keeping the same score as you're going along. Someone often doesn't jump ahead a lot unless they are focusing strictly, I'm getting this set and nothing else, and I'm just going to try to hit that every single time as I go down the Nile, and now that 8's gone and I get 8 points and go down, and 8 points and go down. And you can make those big jumps, but if you don't have the other tiles that are going to get you these random second places and allow you to fritter away a few points along the way, you're probably not going to win. You kind of need this balance of everything that, again, is collectively determined by the players. It was funny looking back on my session report that I wrote after playing the original version of Tutankhamun in 2005, and I talked about king making, because this game seems perfectly primed for people to argue against it because it's all about kingmaking. Because I played 7 times now on this review copy, and in several of the games, often the game ends on another player's turn because they're forced to make a move where if they took a tile, then that set's going to score. But if they pass it, that set is also going to score, and it will end up giving the victory to someone else. And so it feels a little kingmakery at certain times because someone else is triggering the end of the game for another person to win, but all of your actions to that point have led to that particular condition. And it's hard to, on the one hand, you can argue that, well, you should have made different choices to not put yourself in that position where you are now forced to make that final play that is having someone else win. It's hard to make that argument, but you can, because of course, well, if I had taken a different action here, well, then someone else would have taken a different action, and so on and so on and so on. There's so many little actions that it's hard to see how they spill out, right? Is the butterfly in the storm analogy, because if I take a throne that someone else is already collecting, this sets up this competition point between us, and it's going to drive our actions over the rest of the game. And if I took something else, well, now I'm competing with someone else. You're always competing with someone. You have to be competing. If you're not, you're probably not going to win, again, because you're not getting these second place finishes, and you're spending too much time picking up all the tiles of one type. You don't have to do that. You often don't want to do that because you want to let the underworld absorb those tiles, ideally, and you just move on and get something else. So I understand people want to make those arguments, but it also feels like, well, look at what you have done in the past to lead up to what is here. And you were part of that situation as well. We all were, to put us in this situation. And maybe it was the person who won who smartly made that final move that put you in that kingmaker position. There's lots of little things going on in this very simple game, and the design works really well. What does not work quite so well are some of the graphic choices made in this new version. So let me talk a little bit about that. Here's the current state of the game with my holdings, red player holdings, yellow player holdings, what's in the underworld. And we're going to move on from this point. This is somewhat arbitrary because, of course, I threw away lots of tiles in my example, but doesn't matter. We'll just move on from here. I'm trying to see what I have and how I'm going to score points versus what everyone else is collecting. So I need to be somewhat aware of where things are in the path so that I can score them, because I have 2 of these tiles, the red player has 2, and there's one and there's the other one. Okay, so that's probably not going to resolve for a while, but I want to look for that. The Senate board, there's 3 others. The bracelet, I found the other one here. The throne, there's one here. And 4, 2, there's one here. Okay, well, what else is there to collect? There's the Ankhs. There's a dagger that this player has 1. Oh, there's these candle holders, candelabras, that haven't even come up yet. And so I'm trying to scan the path and see where everything is. And while the choice of the blue background for the Nile is very thematic in terms of me going down the Nile, almost all of the tiles become this blur of gold on blue. And it's hard to scan and see what's there and what I can possibly get versus what I have. It's hard to lock in and have some real sense of where I am in the board and sort of the highlights that I need to keep track of. I have to keep scanning to see what's what. I also have that similar issue with the God tiles where they are somewhat similar. The red one stands out, but you also then have the green one that also has the helmet with the object on the top. And where is the 5th one? Not here. Here. Yeah, the 5th one. And I find it difficult to track which ones are which because they are all so dense with only the red artwork kind of standing out here. And this one sort of merging between the two, that I have a hard time differentiating them. And we have a double-sided player aid. There's 6 of those in the box that explain what all the gods do in extremely tiny font that I have to pick up. I have to pick up the card and read it every single time because it is so small and there are no icons and I cannot remember what each god does, even after 7 times playing the game. Maybe that's on me for not paying attention, but I would kind of love having an icon on here so that I know that Ra is remove a tile from the Nile and put it in the underworld. Can that be graphically written? Can that be organized here so that I don't have to refer back to this every single time that I go down the path and say, which one is that again? Which one is that again? Which one is that? And again, maybe that's my issue with not remembering these, but I've played 7 times and I still don't remember. And once I almost want to just use only these 3 gods or only these 2 and just remove all the other ones to make it easier to teach the game. Because I played with new people, I introduced them, oh, there's 5 gods, and here's a brief summary of what they all do. And then often the gods are not used at all, because the one that lets you pull a tile from the underworld shows up at the beginning of the path, or the one that lets you swap 2 tiles in the Nile appears way down here. And so you have these instances of the gods rarely being used, and yet there's a lot of rules overhead to them, and it's not summarized in a way that is easy to pick up during play. You have to go over every single one, and every person is doing that, saying, which one is this again? Oh, it's Thoth, which is swap 2 tiles. Whereas we have an image here of 2 tiles with an arrow between them using gamer language, I would know what that is. So the looks of the game have somewhat overwhelmed the ability to see clearly what the game is. There's also a mini expansion that includes 3 different god tiles. One is actually a symbol. So 2 different god tiles and a symbol. And so this adds 3 more things to try to remember or parse out as you're playing. So it's busier than it needs to be and less clear for the sake of nice looking graphics. So there's also an issue with the box in that I understand the purpose of having this around here. This is very clear who has which score, who is ahead, who is closer to 0. I get that. But then we have the issue of some spaces being differently sized, and also the black spaces not being anything. So we start here at 30, 29, 28, 27, 26, 25. This black is not actually part of the score, except the rules don't mention that, and it's not clear why you would do that. Why not space these tiles out further and just make these slightly bigger to hold more pieces? Because then the size here is very large for the number spots, and you'll often have more people at these beginning spaces before you score any points, and then they're crammed in and it's hard to keep score. Whereas if you spread it out a little more, it would be easier to track. You also somewhat have the issue where you're going to hit something. Oh, it's not doing it now. Let's see if I can do it over here at different times. Where you hit a tile. You saw me do it earlier. And it rotates, and it will move. Or not rotates. It will just walk on the path, and you will lose track of where someone was. And it's hard to recreate because as you score a set, you throw all those tiles in the box, and you have to remember, oh, what did I scored first there and second there and so on. And yeah, I'm pretty sure I have 11. Not 10 and a half. Not here. You have a sarcophagus tile, which is just for looks. It doesn't do anything. You can throw that in here. It's kind of cool. It looks nice with a little gold foil, but it's also extra. Not something I need. So you have the underworld, which is a nice place to hold tiles, and then we have these sentinels that guard it that mostly just get knocked over as people are reaching to put things in the underworld, so I leave them out of play and never touch them. So it's these extra things to add this graphic appeal to it. Maybe had some extra space on the punch sheet, and so we're going to put these in here to look nice guarding the underworld, except then they actually inhibit gameplay, which is the same with the gold on blue look of the tiles, which is the same with the approach for the gods, where they all just blend together. Even though they do have graphic differences, they're so dense, you just can't see it. And this as well as sort of looks over the function. Every player who's played this new version of Tutankhamun has mentioned the gold on blue issue, which is particularly prominent with the 6s because they are long vertical objects. Gold on blue. This one does have 2, so it is a little easier to make out, but at a distance, it's hard to see. Or you've got the 4s that have these oval gold pieces that again just become the same thing. Or the 8s, which again are distinct when they're up close, but at table distance, normal distance that you would be viewing, they kind of become the same with the intricate detail in the middle. I mean, yes, one is rectangular and one is not, but again, they blur. The 2s as well have these same stripe patterns with the blue on the gold, and then at a distance, they also kind of blend together. So the graphic approach makes the game harder to play than you would expect from an understanding of the rules, because it takes you time to figure out exactly what you're trying to get and what you think other people are going to get and how many tiles are left of a certain type and all those sorts of things that ideally you would just scan the table and you have a better understanding of where everything is, and you wouldn't have to reassess each time your turn comes around. Oh, this went away and this went away. How many are there? How many are left again? There's many things to track, and it's hard to understand what's there. And I looked at older pictures, or pictures of the older versions of the game, and I'm like, man, that's much easier to see. Or is it? I'm not really sure. But I decided to find out by buying a copy of the out-of-the-box version of Tutankhamun that has a very different graphic look, and as a weird discovery, actually has different rules for how to play. Let me explain that. On your left is the out-of-the-box version of Tutankhamun, originally released in 2004. On your right, the 25th Century Games version of Tutankhamun from 2021. Not all the tiles are laid out, but we have a sampling of all the different types of tiles so you can compare the two easily. This version has tiles that are far prettier on an individual basis. When you are looking at the tiles closely, these tiles are more legible and give you an easier time of trying to read exactly what is available on the board. Admittedly, I do not have color issues. Perhaps someone who does have a hard time distinguishing red and green would find these too close and they would be identical to them. That might be the case. It's not the case for me. I can see easily the reds pop out for these Cleopatras and the greens here. Okay, I've got all them. The purple, there's only these 2. Oh, there's 3 right here. It's easier to see at a glance what is there. The blue and the purple might be a little too close on the dog statues. Okay, that's possible. There's a tan one for the 3rd. The 4, we've got yellow, orange, and gray. 2s, you got the blue, yellow, and gray, dark gray for the mummified cats. You've got 1 tiles as well. This version has a different assortment of tiles. There are no god tiles. There are no scarab rings. You have 3 1s that are each worth 1 point. That's it. 1 point. Is it worth it to move here and get 1 point off your score? Maybe. Well, again, depends on what everyone else is doing. The other 2 types of tiles in the game, you have this money bag tile. When you land on one of those, you look at the tiles that you've collected. Say I have these so far, and you look at what other people have, and if someone else has that same tile, I can give them the money bag tile, take this tile in return. They then discard the tile into the box, and they get rid of a coin. Instead of spirit points that are tracked on a path, you have a pile of coins. And you have a pyramid that has a slot in the back where you can put the coins essentially to pay tribute. And you drop them inside the pyramid, and now they are out of play. So the bag of coins lets you compete for majorities in a different way, similar to the god tiles here that may let you throw a tile into the underworld or pull one back from the underworld or exchange a scarab ring for something anywhere on the path. You can compete for majorities in different ways here. The bag of money lets you do it here. Additionally, you have these pharaoh symbols. There are 3 bags, there are 3 pharaohs. This is a joker. When I collect this, I put it aside and I don't have to declare it to be any particular thing. When something scores, if the last of these tiles is taken and this player took one, this player took one, and I took one, I could declare this to be a 4 at the time, and then I have the majority, and I will get rid of 4 of my coins instead of having a tie. Because in this version of the game, there is no tiebreaker. It doesn't matter where your pawn is on the path. You can be anywhere. If we ended the game in the situation with 1-1-1, we would each get rid of 1 coin, and that's it. You spoil the other person's collection by picking up this last one, and now we all tie and we each get rid of only 1 instead of me getting rid of 4 because I'm further back on the path. Nope, doesn't work that way. There is no tiebreaker. Everything cuts out evenly. So with the tiebreaker, or with the joker here though, I can choose. That's like a threat over your head that I'm going to add this at this point, and I would get 4, and you as the second place holders would each get only 1. I could still get my 4 points. So maybe you don't want to collect that. This is a very valuable tool because it allows you, again, to threaten to steal majorities at any time. In the first game we played, my opponents let me grab all 3 of these, which was a huge mistake because essentially I was controlling the possible scoring of everything else, and they were competing for other things that I wasn't even involved with, which let me jump ahead here. Also, another difference on this, there is no backwards movement. You only move forwards. It's far more streamlined. That's it. Move forward as far as you want. Done. If you get to the end of the path, skipping past this tile, you can grab the pharaoh off the pyramid here. You deposit a coin in tribute, and you have a joker to use for whatever tiles you have remaining that have not yet scored here. And they will again score as people remove them on the path. You take no other actions. You are done, but you still have things that you can score as things are resolved. Now, that's a bit of the gameplay differences, the movement difference, the different tile arrangement, the tile breaking. There's all little differences to how this all works. A little more streamlined because you don't have the gods to reference. You don't have the tiebreaker, although the tiebreaker is kind of a cool thing. You have coins that you can sort of see what each player has, but I can't look at this and be like, I guess you got between 15 and 20. I don't really know. I can't see the value like I can on here, but the problem is on here, sometimes the value will move. So each of these choices is not necessarily ideal, but there are huge differences to them, especially with the slot on the back where it seems really cool to say, okay, I'm going to pay tribute and do this, but number one, the pyramid could be on the other side of the table and you have to give the coin to someone else to put in. And number two, when you score 8 points, you do not want to sit around trying to put 8 coins in here. Why? Just take your 8 coins, put them on the side, done. Get on with it. Play, play, play. Focus on the game. As far as I understand, the rules for this version of Tutankhamun are identical to the 1993 version published by Amigo in Germany. And I've played this version of the game 4 times. Once back in 2005 that I barely remember, and 3 times recently, twice with 3 players and once with 4. Whereas I played this on a review copy 7 times with all player counts 2 to 6. So I've had some experience with both. People have been somewhat split. People who have played this and now played this version, some prefer this one because of the streamlining and the simplicity of it. You don't have the complexity of the god tiles that you have to remember. You don't futz around with the markers on the path. Everything is more straightforward. You don't have the movement where you could possibly go backwards. Everything is much more, even more streamlined than in this version of the game. You're going to move forward. You're going to pick something. We're going to score. There's no tiebreaker. You just split the points if you tie with someone else. Everything seems more cut and dried and straightforward with only those 2 special tiles to know the rules for. Other people have preferred this version of the game because of the god tiles introducing this element, a way to manipulate the tiles that have either left the game or push things out of the game or do whatever. And the tile breaker is a cool twist because thematically it makes sense, at least to me, the idea that you are rewarded for not rushing ahead. You are not trying to prove yourselves in an obvious way. You're not grandstanding, going out there saying, look, I got this for you. Yes, cleanse my spirits because I did the work. Instead, you quietly do the work in the background and then you're rewarded more. Someone else rushes ahead and it gives a different feel to the game for how you are moving on the path and the choices that you make for how far ahead you move, because you are constantly aware of that tiebreaker potential if you have tiles than someone else does, for how you're trying to collect things and why you're passing something over that maybe you're trying to get someone to stay back to get something. With a 4-point tile particularly, where they're going to get 4 and you only get 2, but that's okay because you know they're going to get this thing, but you care more about this other thing that's further down the path and you want to keep them from getting it. Or, if they bypass it, then that tile will get thrown out and you'll get the majority because they didn't pick it up. It's this interesting pull that changes how you evaluate things versus this, which is much more straightforward and just tie break. It's, everybody splits the points and that's just how it works out there. You don't have to worry about who is farther back. So you can see how Kinesia gets up to having multiple hundreds of games because you've got this same concept and I'm not even sure how to describe how different they are. Like, the core of the game, move ahead, get a tile, score sets, that's identical. But are they like 50% identical? 90% identical? I don't even really know. I don't know how to differentiate those types of things. And it's interesting because, again, it points out that not every game necessarily has this platonic ideal where it's one solution and one thing works best and that's just how it's going to be. You can take this same idea and put different twists on it over time. And again, you have 1993's Amigo, and then you got 2004, this version, you got 2021, this version. There'll probably be a 2035 version with a slightly different spelling of Tutankhamun, I guess, as you're interpreting hieroglyphics, see how to spell it. And you can have some other twist down the road where you just have a similar idea and you spin it a different way and you hit a slightly different audience. And this version exists for those people who want it. You can buy a used copy like I did. This version's on the market now for someone who wants what's easily available and not having to go dig into the used market. There you go. Overview of Tutankhamons from Reiner Knizia.